Hey, everybody, welcome to Deep Dive. And this is Mr. John Atkinson. Say hi, John.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast, episode 4. Super excited to be here. All things about the nervous system today, how to regulate it, how to be aware of our nervous system. And we live in a society where we're always in fight or flight mode. And I always talk about, the carbonated lifestyle here in the American culture versus more of a fermented lifestyle where, letting your nervous system be regulated. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of things in the physical body that we've talked about in the previous episode with our incredible guest, Megan. And the myofascia and how you say it, Guru, all the time is our bodies are not meant to be a dumpster. We're not supposed to hold on to these things. And so I wanted to ask you first, how does one regulate their nervous system? And two, when you have a new client or anybody that you talk to, how can you tell, like, what are some social cues of unregulated nervous systems?
The nervous system is actually really fascinating when it comes to spirituality, and it can really get out of whack, specifically if your emotional body is having issues, because your nervous system is really strongly and powerfully connected to your emotional body. So if you're having emotional output issues, whether it's something that you're noticing or not, it's important to understand and begin to copulate excellent emotional output regulation. And what I mean by that is you get to understand, first of all, what the emotional body is and what it does, and then pay attention to how you feel and make sure it's not getting bottlenecked inside of you. Because what's going to happen is you're going to suddenly, over time, if you're ignoring it for long enough, neurological issues are going to happen because there's going to be too much pressure for you to be able to hang on to. And also spiritually, if you're not handling things in a way that is supportive of everything that's going on in your life, you can get a bottleneck there as well, depending. I mean, you can get kind of a balloon feeling in your head where, it feels like it's going to pop. It can be very disorienting, and sometimes that happens right at the beginning of a shift to a spiritual shift. But if you're not paying attention to your spiritual body, it's a sign that, it's something is trying to get out and you get to give it an exit. So, uh, but there's a lot of different reasons how the neurological system is affected, and they all deserve a second look. And honestly, that could fill a book. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of points just to give you guys a taste. But part of how you start regulating that is by uh, getting that connection going with your spiritual body that's really powerful. So, and that's really, at the end of the day, that's about meditation. That's about meditation. And meditation isn't necessarily when you sit down and close your eyes and you focus. Meditation can be all day. Meditation technically means, your connection to God and how you're connecting to that higher self, or whatever you want to call it, connection to the bigger energy that's out there, and everyone's going to relate to it in a different way, and however you relate to it is fine. I'm not attached to the verbiage, but that if it's source for you or whatever it is, you get to learn how to connect with it in a way that's authentic and real and not just in your imagination. So and once you start doing that, you can start regulating the nervous system, because that is also uh, it's also how you're connecting to the emotional body in a way that makes sense and in a way that's very healing. So hopefully that's supportive of your question.
So good. And I love the part where, the nervous system goes back to our ancestors of being out in nature, knowing, that fight or flight response. Why do you think even more so nowadays it's at an all-time high where people have a hard time having their nervous system regulated in the world that we live in? Do you think it has to be, there's got to be a laundry list of things that what do you see most when a client comes in terms of their nervous system and today's world compared to, say, maybe even 100 years ago, right? I think probably if you looked at some data, their bodies were probably more regulated than ours because of the current times we're living in, or possibly equal to. So what would you say with your expertise from seeing a variety and range of age groups in your practice? um, is there a certain type of nervous system that you see all the time?
Good questions. So, just to add just a little chiropractic adjustment to what you were saying, uh, Steven Pinker wrote a book called Enlightenment Now. And what he talked about in this book has to do with the fact that how we seem to have this idea that today in this landscape we're so much more stressed out, things are so much worse. I'm not saying you were saying all of these things, but I'm just, generally speaking, there is a belief in our civilization that things are so much worse now in so many ways and things aren't getting better. And he actually went through all of these different charts and dynamics and talking about homicides, racism, body regulation, all kinds of things in this book of his. And he shows in every single chart with scientific and logistical data, just everything that actually needs to be within whatever he was researching for every specific chart. He shows how everything's getting better and how, as an example, even a few generations ago, how it might have been common for us to witness at least 2 murders in our lifetime. And nowadays it's more of the norm to maybe hear about one or know of a friend that might have had one, witnessed one, or maybe we know of a friend that might have been murdered who have witnessed one, compared to how it used to be, as an example. So it's all relative. It's all relative because how we're going to conceive and perceive our lives in the now has to do with just the evidence or the information that we have in front of us. So a person that has an immaculate life, that only has time in their lives, like let's say they're uber rich, all they do is get up and swim in the pool and they eat fruit and they go out and they have perfect body regulation, they exercise, and they have all the best people making sure their bodies are massaged and everything. Like, okay, it sounds like an amazing life, but at the same time, if they're not used to having anything happen to them, even a small little thing happening to them will seem like this big. And for us, that this big might be comparable to how we might feel a car accident affects us, or a breakup or something like that. So let's say this person gets a break in their routine and they're not able to get dinner at all. That might be the worst thing in the world for this person that's never experienced anything and doesn't know the difference between what's big and what's not. For in their world, it might be really huge. And we can't compare their world with somebody who's used to dealing with stress or trauma, because it's different. But us as a human race, we used to deal with a lot more stress than we do now in some ways. In other ways, to be fair, it's a very complicated question because there's a lot of different factors for us as a more modern human race that we deal with, including everything that's coming up with AI and everything that's coming up with the way people try to steal information from us. And it's hard and it's stressful for sure. I'm not taking away from that. I'm just saying that it's in the scheme of things, it was a lot harder if we're looking at the balance back then than it is now. Now, as far as how people come in and they see me and how they're dealing with their lives at this time, it's clear that a lot of people's nervous systems are shot. It's very, they find it very difficult to regulate who they are as a person, what's been happening, and a lot of these things to teach people how to uh, live a healthy life spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. They're much more available than they ever have been, but at the same time, a lot of what would help be available to the point where they can create a formula for their lives that makes sense for them, because everybody is different and everybody needs something different. And we're just not quite set up to win yet, to teach people right out of the gate how to deal with their specified emotions, or life stuff that makes sense yet. And I'm hoping that we're moving into that. But yes, in a lot of different ways. It just depends on the season, a year ago it was much different than it is now, as far as the different things that people are coming in with. They're forgetting about everything that happened with the last few years that was really hard for us as a human race. And they're moving into other things, but there's a lot of financial things that are happening to people now that are, they're trying to reestablish their lives, and it's been very challenging. And different things stress people out at different times. But also I feel like there's a bit more of a fragility there, like where they're more fragile than they used to be in some ways. And more and more I feel like I'm attracting people who don't have as strong as of a pillar, or a
Mhm.
sense of self. Like there's more of a mental fragility there than I've ever seen. And I'm, maybe it's just a season, and maybe it's just who gets to come to me right now, and either way it's fine. But it does feel like there's a degradation here there, like it's degrading. It's not as strong as it used to be. So we just got to keep doing the good work and see what we can create for people.
Mhm. I love the comparison between then and now, and I think that's such a good thing in terms of our nervous system. Is each thing culturally, years ago, generation, um, is all relevant to what was happening in the world in that time frame. I agree with in terms of mental body, and that has become weaker because you know, what we've been through the last 2 or 3 years, it has been a grind for so many people, and the exhaustion rate on the mentality of, like, "One more thing," or, "Can I push through this?" And as you and I both know, when we do that, we lean into our growth, we step up into, our map of consciousness, we step up into a new residency of living, and that can be an extremely hard place to be in. And so I liked how you highlighted that. And then I just was thinking when you were saying people were more stressed out dependent on the situation. Like I feel like my grandparents or their parents would be laughing at our frustrations or our at our stress, not in a judgmental way, but humor way. We have so much, like you recognized and you brought up, is like the AI, the like I said, the carbonated lifestyle, the thing, the push of a button, the convenience, right? You could have your groceries delivered to your house. You could order pickup in certain. There was so much things that people had to wait on, and with that there is a regulation in the waiting, I think, and in the grounding. So when we're waiting on something, I feel like either one, it could know the unknown. Like if we're brought up to, hey, it's going to take 2 weeks to find out X, Y, and Z, at least in our head, we could tangibly picture that, and that's like off our nervous system. Where I think sometimes when we have unknown, it triggers that fight or flight in us. So I know you and I have talked about this before in terms of like blowing off steam, and like how does one regulate them, and channeling in so-called line with their higher self. Well, there's other ways our culture and people on an individual scale, I know for myself, would try to regulate, um, my nervous system through like drinking or at times drugs or choices that didn't add up to my divinity. Can you share about that in terms of, I know, like you said, blowing off steam, but in those ways, how is that blowing off steam? And then also, how is that really not regulating our system and kind of depleting it at the same time?
So, how is what blowing off steam? I'm sorry, I missed that somehow.
Yeah, how is like what was the actual question? How is the how people blow off steam in terms of like drinking
Oh,
or
I
going out, like partying, all that, where sometimes our culture gets involved in that. Like, think about how people live like Monday through Friday. They're so excited to go into the weekend. Hey, let me have a drink. Which no joke there. I've been there, done that. But that was taking away from my higher calling and higher consciousness and really taking away from my nervous system, even though I thought it was regulating my nervous system, not knowing it was actually depleting it even more. And then come Monday, I'm like, okay, why do I even feel?
Oh, 100%. Yes. So, here's the thing about so when you try to blow the okay, we are all of our bodies are not us. So meaning we are the spirit. So we have the physical, we have the mental, and we have the emotional. Uh, and and it's just what they're not always going to understand what each other needs, and they're not always going to care. So your mental or emotional body might want to drink because it thinks that that's going to be what's best for you, but the physical body's going to say no. That's definitely not what I want. It's not going to make you feel any better. So because you get to consider all the bodies when you think about what is going to be the best for your out there and drinking and doing a bunch of drugs while you're blowing off emotional steam. It's actually doing a lot more damage to your other bodies. So you can't just uh, pick one that's good for just one body and say F you to the rest of them. It doesn't work that way. You get to pick something that's going to be great for all four, ideally. So you get to be cognizant of that. Uh, it's just it does when you do a lot of drinking or you do a bunch of drugs. Not only is it damaging the physical body, but you're also damaging the spiritual body too. I mean, depending on what you're doing to blow off that type of steam, you're going to literally create rips in your auric field, which is going to leave you more vulnerable for attack, for different types of things and people, and it'll weaken you at least temporarily. And you'll be open to things that you just don't want in your field. So your spiritual body gets to stay strong. It's the epidermis of your energetic field. It's meant to protect you from everything that's hanging out on the outside. And so if you start screwing yourself over and say, I don't care about any of the other bodies, I just want this emotional release because it's screaming at me, uh, you should really be thinking about, well, maybe I can make it win 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 and create a some sort of release that's going to be good for all four of my bodies, and then I'll feel good all the way around, and I'll actually get the relief that I'm hoping for, the true relief. Does that fly with you? What do you think?
Yeah, that's what I was getting at is how does it align with someone's end goal in terms of thinking about that stuff? And I you hit it right on the head with that. The nervous system, I would say, is such a missing link for so many. And in terms of just the physical body, and we always talk about this in our society of like people are like, oh, I'm anxious, I'm unsettled. They're like, they're talking about their nervous system, but really not making that connection. So, how would you say people can become more aware of their nervous system in the present moment?
Well, because you have experience with this, I'd really like to hear a firsthand account about how you did it.
Okay, so I think, man, there's so many examples. In terms of the nervous system, anything that brings up anxiety or anxiousness. So it could be any topic you're thinking of. This is towards the viewers, and that you have a fear of it. Something that you're anxious, and your core and physically you're going to feel, there could be a few things. You could get sweaty, you could get sweaty palms, you could your arms. You could start elevating your body temperature. So it's a physical response where you're unsettled. Your body can shut down. Maybe it's a topic that you don't want to talk about. Maybe you're in a relationship where someone triggers you, and that's a fight or flight where you might want to fight, but your internal shuts down and you just don't want to talk about it. So there's certain things um, that could go on physically that you could be feeling. You could feel a heat. So like if someone actually recently at work, we deal with a lot of like the homeless people. And so we allow them to shop unless they're, stealing from us. And about 3 or 4 days ago, a homeless person was stealing from us. And our policy is like, hey, if we see you, we're going to call it out, right? That's like any business. But we have a no policy where it's like you don't chase them, obviously. And, my job's worth more than the incident if anything were to occur. So in that state, my nervous system wanted to fight, right? There was murderous rage in terms of, hey, this person's stealing from a collective place, a place where people come to purchase, um, and you're just super angry. So there's warmness and a lot of fire coming out because it's like I saw this person steal something. Second off, they're lying, so that could trigger even more. And then third, it is a fight or flight because it ancestral, you guys. It goes back to war times, not even just like current modern times, but say you're out in the jungle, that killer instinct comes out like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to let this person steal from our business. And because you work so hard and what it represents, and you're there for the public, and it's a business of buying things. So you have the person at the door, you're asking them, they're lying to you, you're feeling all this rage, this anger, you're also feeling sadness because at the end of the day, we help other as a you're seeing like, dang, this person has to, no matter what their background is, this person has to steal to be able to eat. Like that, to me, that's sad. And I think in this country, it's elevated even more than it has to be. Being a world traveler, been to 32 countries, we have such a homelessness challenge where if you were to look at any other country, there is homelessness, but there is a gap between our homelessness and like poverty. So there's a huge difference on that. I won't get into that, um, but yeah, it was more just that feeling of, okay, fight or flight, that heat, that fire to really get into that moment. And then at the end of it, it's how do I think the big question too, Guru, is like after those moments, how do I regulate it, right? How do I get back to my grounded John self? Is okay, I played out the play. You can't really do much. You let your superiors know, your boss know of the situation, and it's kind of out of your hand, and all you do is pray for the collective because there's multiple hims or hers out there doing that currently as we speak to survive. And so how do we improve upon that is being better in terms of how do we serve the collective, how do we be more inclusive, how do we get these people help. So there's a double edge on that. But in that moment, Guru, in terms of the nervous system, is just like really much fight and flight of just like wanting to, like basically like a police officer. You're kind of like, okay, this person's stealing. It's in the act. Like, how do you address it? And then another example would be knowing right before you're going to grow, you might have anxiety, right? And so I've been working with you, Guru, for a while. It's like, oh, I'm anxious, or I'm peeling off these layers because I know I need to jump up to this new residency. I might have a foot up on the residency and I might be like in between, and you just have to jump and go. So your physical still might just be like not ready. You feel like you're dying inside. There's so many times, and you could expand on this. I would love for you to expand on it. Is when we're growing, we feel like we're dying because our old self, our old layers are peeled back, and our nervous system is embracing that change through that dying process, and it feels like you're just dead. You don't have any feeling. Um, you can't really get into that drive, but then once you hit that new residency and everything, you just feel renewed and your nervous system's regulated again. So like we've talking nervous system, it's not linear. So there's no like, oh, my nervous system is similar to this nervous system. I think like Guru, like you're saying, there's so many intrinsic things that go into one's DNA, one's nervous system, bloodline trauma, and beyond. But with the physical, I think everyone can agree it's like it's a feeling. Like what emotion, like inside your body, what are you feeling? Like, okay, you're feeling the emotion of anger, but what does it feel like? It feels like a volcano coming out. It feels like I want to fight, you know? So those are some examples recently that I've had.
There you go. Well, all right. So, sorry, I got to put this over here. So, I was making a list while you were talking about different types of neurological reactions that people experience, especially because the gist of what I'm getting from what you were talking about has to do with what happens when people are growing spiritually. You know, because there is when you actually are in it spiritually and you're going for it, people will use spirituality to hide, but that's not really what spirituality is about. Spirituality is actually can be a very challenging, difficult thing to go through because you're facing everything about yourself that is painful. And you're going to process it through all four of the bodies. So you're going to process it physically, and you're going to have physical symptoms, which is why I feel like part of the reason why we're talking about this is the neurological reactions that you might get when you're processing some of the stuff out physically, when you're really going through it. And if we're talking about that, a lot of different things are going to happen. So when people will purge, meaning they start to release some of these things that's inside